Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Geraldine Parent, Executive Director of the Okanagan Symphony. It's indeed a pleasure to see you all again for our next series of Maestros Musings conversation. So this is the first one in our fall series. We've advertised these, now we've changed the adjustment a bit. We're about 45 minutes in length. This will include any Q&A that you might have. If you need to leave at any time, please note we are recording these sessions and they will be available for reviewing on our website. So if you've missed anything or want to go back, you'll be pleased to be able to do that. Related to a couple of housekeeping items, we ask that you keep your microphone on mute. We love to see you, but if you're having issues with your internet or you want to stay behind the camera, then you can close your video off. And as well, you might want to, when our guests are speaking, to go to a speaker view. Just then you're concentrating on the speakers. I am going to put a message in the chat because this is where you will ask any questions or leave us any comments or things. Rosemary will be both monitoring that. We can ask questions as they come up. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rosemary to begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back into our 21-22 season and this new edition of Maestros Musings to our plate from last year. It's really fun for me to have these conversations with conductors, some of whom I know well and some of whom I meet for the first time on these calls. Our guest today is the wonderful Gordon Gerrard. And this is, Gordon is someone that I know very well. We've known each other for, must be a couple of decades. Almost, which is, all perspective. Gordon is in his 6th season as music director of the Regina Symphony, although as he accurately pointed out to me, it was last year really a season. The jury's still out on that one. Before that, Gordon was the associate conductor of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, working very closely with Bramwell Tovey, and that's something that Gordon and I have in common, is that we both had the privilege of being kind of the left hand, right hand, man, person, woman to Bramwell, and getting the opportunity to learn from him. There's a little club of Bramwell Tovey assistants across the country now. He was also the resident conductor and repetiteur at Calgary Opera for many years and continues to guest conduct with them. He made his Edmonton Opera debut last year or 2 years ago. And he's really conducted many of the orchestras across the country. You know how in musical theater, they talk about a triple threat where you sing, dance, and act. That's not what Gord does, but he is a triple threat conductor in that he is equally at home conducting opera, symphonic music, and ballet. And he's done quite a bit of work also with the National Ballet of Canada. So he really, I think Gordon, like me, we love being on the stage, but we also really love being in the pit of despair. We sometimes joke about when you're doing opera and ballet. There's something totally different about creating music with the orchestra in the pit and the musicians or dancers, singers on stage. So we'll talk about that a little bit in our conversation today. But I think equally important to Gordon's artistry and his vision is he's an extraordinary educator. And we actually met a couple of times, but we've started working closely together at an opera training program in Edmonton called Opera Nuova. But Gordon has worked with the Atelier Montreal, other young artist programs. And one of my Zoom activities over the last year was Zooming in with Gord, where he was really working with me on Italian diction, because he has a huge specialty in working with students and conductors and coaches on diction of various languages. It's been a real study for him. He has his master's degree from the Manhattan School of Music in New York City. And just there's no end to this young man's talents. But leading at the forefront, I think that Gord brings a new vision for orchestral leadership. And here we are simpatico. We are both really looking, and we share conversation many times about how to create programming that is truly inclusive and that really brings the future of the orchestra into consideration as we work to think beyond a colonizing art form and to really think about how we can decolonize the orchestra, still maintaining all the beautiful traditions that we have. So there is a long introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gordon Gerrard. Hey, Gord.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And can you just tell us a little bit about how you've opened at the Regina Symphony? Because I know you've had several concerts through the month of September, and we don't open for another 2 weeks. So I want to live vicariously through your experience.
Yeah, we're very excited that we are actually off to the races here finally. We were watching things as everyone has been throughout the summer, and we kind of took a bold step in that we announced our season 21-22 back in March, and that was a bit of a gamble. So we all knew that it may or may not happen, or parts of it may or may not happen, and we're still in that boat, frankly. But I'm happy to say that we are now 3 consecutive weekends into concerts with live audiences. Our first was a chamber music program, which was a smaller audience. And then we opened on our big stage, which our first time we were there since February of 2020. And we had a decent crowd, not huge, but there were more people in the audience than in the orchestra. So I took that as a win. And then the last weekend, we opened our sort of secondary season, which is smaller orchestra programming at the cathedral in town here, Holy Rosary Cathedral. So, and then this weekend we open our Baroque series. So after this, we'll have everything kind of off and running, and we see how it goes, but it feels great.
And so was that the first experience you had with live audience then in this whole time? Because I know you guys have done some recording with Regina.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm not going to get into the who's doing a better job, which province of managing this pandemic, but I will say that there are fewer limitations on our activities being in Saskatchewan, and that was the case last fall as well. And so when the rest of the country essentially was down to, I think it was 50 people in BC, we still were able to have 150 people in Saskatchewan. So we actually started off our season with smaller orchestras, about 30 players, and that meant we could welcome in about 120 people, which we did until November when things got locked down again, and then we had to sort of shift to online.
So give me a few observations for you personally about doing things digitally as opposed to live. Well, I know what you're going to say, but just share it anyway.
Well, from a personal, emotional attachment to the experience, it's nowhere near what it is to have an audience. I mean, it is, of course, great to connect with the orchestra and make music, but to not have that immediate connection to people there, it does change things. I think on a sort of more intellectual level, right now, this is early days trying to figure out where this is going to go, where this should go, what orchestras like mine, which are not huge, like we're not the Toronto Symphony, we're not the New York Philharmonic, we have very limited resources. What does an orchestra like us, what should we do, what should it look like? All these things are rolling around in my head. So every time we do a sort of a digital project, it's sort of collecting information, because I think we just hadn't done any until COVID kind of pushed us into the water, into the deep end. So, and I think a lot of orchestras are like that. It just never got high enough on the priority list, mostly from a financial point of view, that we just never really considered the practicalities of it and strategically what the best projects were to advance the orchestra. So that now we're there, like it or not.
Yeah, and I know you and I have had some conversations around, were we meant to do this? And do we have the expertise to do it well? You mentioned the resources. It's both expertise, but also the financial commitment that it takes to really do something well from a video perspective. It's not just throw a camera up there and see how it goes, So it's been a challenge, I think, for many, as you say, the more regional orchestras especially. Now, you've got so much experience in the theater So not just on stage with orchestra, but you've done so much opera and have a great grasp of the theatricality of that art form. Does that inform your decisions or your planning when you're looking at doing some digital content?
Well, I mean, I think the reality is, like you say, yes, it's about resources, but it's also about expertise. Now, I've spent a lot of time in a theater. I have spent zero time directing and producing film content.
Mhm.
And it is, it's completely different. And I think what we're finding here is that, in Regina, we've got some great folks who are doing digital stuff, none of whom have really any experience with orchestras. So it's trying to take what I know, take what they know, and try and figure it out mostly on the fly when you've got limited time, a limited budget. So it's bumpy for sure. We've had some bumps and we continue to have some bumps, but I think most of us are in that boat at the moment.
Yeah, it's quite interesting being this where we are in our careers, both you and me and many of our colleagues, feeling very confident about what we do. Like we really learned over decades how to hone our craft. And now we're being asked to do a completely different craft. It feels weird to be back at that kind of beginning learning stage. Can you share any particular successes you feel that you guys have had in this digital stream?
Yeah, actually. So I think because we were in the position we were being in Saskatchewan last fall, we didn't really plan for any digital things. We had planned, because we could still do small concerts. That was our plan for the season. And it's not like we put all our eggs in that basket, but we put most of our eggs in that basket. And then when all of a sudden, literally, with 12 hours notice, the rules changed on us and we realized that we couldn't do anything. We really had to fly into action. And so we took a piece that we had performed just a couple of weeks before, Chamber Symphony by Shostakovich. And that was our first attempt to make a digital offering. And the way we went about it, sort of from a technical standpoint, the audio and the video, I think we would do it completely differently now, but it took many, many hours and I don't know, many hundreds of emails between the whole team to try and get it there. But the final product I'm really quite happy with. So that now lives on our website, which we have a separate section called RSO at Home. And so there's that and a few other projects. And then this past August, we actually got some funding to do 4 more of those projects. So we're slowly building a library, which is great because, before this, if anyone, I'm not sure that anyone on this call has ever been to Regina and heard the Regina Symphony. Now, if you want to go check it out, it's there. And we just didn't have that resource for people from away to engage with us. So to me, that's a big win.
That's certainly the silver lining, right? Is being kicked into that deep end. I don't know that any of us would have explored the opportunity or made it a high enough priority without kind of being forced to do that.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. And I've heard the Shostakovich and it is spectacular.
Thank you.
I was very, if I don't sound too condescending, very proud of you.
Well, thank you very much.
So Gord, I really want to jump into the Forward Currents Festival that you created. Was that in your first year with Regina or your second year?
So the first one happened in the spring of 2018. So that was in my second season.
Okay. And so just maybe give our listeners a little snapshot of what the Forward Currents Festival is.
Yeah, when I came to Regina, I looked at what we were doing, what we were offering. I also looked at our capacity in terms of an organization to add more if we could. And it seemed to me that we had the capacity, and it seemed to me there were things that could add to what we were offering our community. And so we thought about doing a little mini festival, weekend festival, which, lots of orchestras do. Lots of orchestras end up doing something like a contemporary music festival or they would do choose a composer. Like the number of Beethoven festivals that have happened are far too many to count. And I looked at what had been done here. They did, long before I came here, there was a contemporary music festival, but it sort of died out for various reasons. And so I thought instead we would try something which is a little bit unusual. I thought we could do this weekend mini festival, so 3 days. And every year we would choose a theme or a topic that's of social relevance to our community and build the festival around that. And so the first year that we did it, we chose to build the program around the conversations happening about truth and reconciliation. And then the second year we did it, it was all about mental health awareness, which was interesting and challenging. And then the next one, which is slated for the end of April this coming year, it has now been postponed twice for obvious reasons. So I'm hoping that we can get there, but that will be all about the issues and a celebration of LGBTQ2S plus folks and allies in our community. So it's an initiative that I'm very proud of, and I think it also has been enormously supported by the musicians of the orchestra and the staff, and of course my board as well. So I think that we're a little orchestra with we don't have tons of resources, both human resources and financial, but I think we're slowly starting to get it established so that it lives as part of our regular programming, and everyone's proud of that.
So what's been the patron response?
Well, it's been interesting. What we have done for this, one of the things that I really wanted to do was, because it's such a sort of a different approach, it's intended to, of course, welcome our regular patrons, but also I want to open this up to people who aren't normally our people, that we find a venue that was anywhere but our normal venue. So I wanted to take it out of we're on the stage, you're out in the dark theater. So we did it in, finding venues has been a challenge. The first year we did it at the Mackenzie Art Gallery, which is the big gallery in town. And we put the orchestra in the middle of the floor in one of the big galleries, and then we put seating around, which means if you wanted to, you could literally be about 5 feet from the concertmaster, which is a super cool experience for some people.
Right.
So, our capacity is pretty limited in terms of how many people we can fit in that. But we've had, I would say, small but very enthusiastic crowds. And then I find I've had a few emails, surprisingly, from some of our regular patrons who ask me and say, when's the next one? When's it happening? What's going on? So that's really gratifying as well.
And how do you choose I think, if I remember correctly, there are lots of elements that are based on music for sure, but then you also had some panel discussions and some other opportunities for engaging with that topic, the subject matter, whatever that topic is. So I want to ask about that as well, but I'm curious to know how you go about programming the music for this. Is it all contemporary composers, or are you looking at a wide sort of historical spectrum of?
It's a great question. Yeah, one of the things that I wanted it not to be was a contemporary music festival with a theme attached. And so it's important that the programming represent the full spectrum of the music that we do. So there is, quote unquote, classical music. We have sort of pop music elements that are worked in, chamber music, of course, because we have an existing chamber ensemble within our orchestra. And then it's intended to be a collaborative community effort. So we have partnered with the New Dance Horizons, which is a contemporary dance group here in town. And so that was part of it. We also have included video elements, short films, that kind of thing. So that it really is a multidisciplinary, but also multi-genre look at whatever the theme might be.
It seems very collaborative. It is very collaborative, clearly. And can you speak a little bit about where your decision, like, what came first, the idea of this general festival, or was the first festival that was looking at the Indigenous culture in the Regina context, and I think in the national context too? So just give me a little bit of that creative thought process of how you got to the first one and then how it continued from there.
Yeah, I mean, it really was, the concept always has been that we take a different topic every year that's of social relevance. And we had a number of ideas for the first one. And we kind of took a little a poll within ourselves, kind of, and the staff team. And we decided with the work that we had been doing with the Indigenous community that Truth and Reconciliation was the right place to start with this festival. And it was, I mean, it was very timely. You know, one of the things that happened, which we could not have foreseen, of course, was about 2 weeks before the first festival, the verdict in the Colton Boushie shooting case came out, which of course, that all took place in Saskatchewan. And so it became a very meaningful way for a lot of us to engage in what was going on. And certainly it was a very meaningful event for Indigenous folks who joined us.
So I want to share with our listeners that Gordon has been really on the forefront of this work. We talked a little bit about how do you decolonize a very colonial art form. And Gordon was featured with his team on an Orchestras Canada webinar because the Regina Symphony has been very successful in creating an Indigenous Advisory Council. I don't know that, I think yours is the most integrated of any that I've heard about in the country. And can you speak a little bit? So that came first, I think, right before you did the Forward Currents Festival. So you were able to draw on the inclusion and the very important leadership step of listening to what was important to the Indigenous community in Regina and Saskatchewan. Can you just share a little bit about how that Indigenous Art Advisory Council came to be and how they're still part of your organization?
Yeah.
How you interface with them as a non-Indigenous person?
Yeah. So one of the important things that I have learned, or maybe that I'm still learning, is that in order to do something like our Forward Currents Festival, which is intended to engage with the communities and parts of our community that we don't normally interact with, is that you really have to figure out what real consultation is. And then when you ask someone for their advice, you really have to have a good reason not to follow it. And that's the real trick of it, because sometimes they're going to give you an answer that you don't like, or that's complicated, or that costs more money, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where you have to make a commitment, as both personally and an organization. This is consultation. If people feel they're being truly listened to, then they feel it's a more welcoming space. So that sort of came about because of and during the sort of creation of the Regina Symphony's Indigenous Advisory Council. You know, I am very fortunate that we have an amazing board member named Audrey Young, who is First Nations, from Cowessess First Nation, which is just a couple hours outside of Regina. She has been on the board since I came. So we started at the same time. And she has a lot of experience integrating the sports side of things in Saskatchewan into reconciliation and engaging Indigenous youth. And she and some of her other colleagues on the sports side recognize that not all kids like sports, and there are lots of kids that like other things, like music and other more sort of cultural things. And so she was very interested in seeing if she could take that experience and bring it to sort of this side of of the table, which is, obviously, I think it's amazing. And so through her efforts, her experience mostly, and her enthusiasm, she was really the one that helped us to set up this Indigenous Advisory Council. So I think we're going on to year 4 with the council, and it's sort of morphed into different things over the years. It's gotten a little bit smaller, but a little bit more, we've sort of streamlined the process. But basically what happens is we meet a few times a year, and they are there to advise me and our admin team on how to do things, who to talk to, making introductions to folks in the Indigenous community, because one of the things that we have learned is that, for example, we did a tour with Buffy Sainte-Marie, which was super cool for me. And so she came and did a concert in Regina, and then we took a smaller orchestra with her, and we toured to 3 reserves outside of Regina. And we performed mostly in schools, and it was an amazing experience, I think, for all of us. But one of the things that we learned is that, okay, you have this amazing project where you want to bring Buffy Sainte-Marie and an orchestra to a community. You can't just call someone up and say, hey, look, I'm Gordon, I got something for you, because you're just not going to get anywhere. And the process and the protocols of really establishing relationships before you act, that's been one of the key goals of the IAC, as we call it, the Indigenous Advisory Council, and one of the main assets for me. So it's been super interesting for me. It was, especially at the beginning, a very steep learning curve, and we definitely had our bumps, and we still do, but it's been one of the most rewarding parts of this job.
Well, I commend you, Gord, because we've had many conversations. I know that we both really are seeking ways to create that meaningful relationship, but I think you really are, one of the leaders in this country of digging into that work. And I think it's much more on people's radar now. Mm-hmm. But, you were there, you're one of the first ones to really make it a priority in your organization. And I think that's very inspiring. And I know you've inspired many of us as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I know that I mentioned that Gordon and I both spent time as resident conductors, associate conductors with Bramwell Tovey. And one of the big things that I learned from Bramwell, and I know it's been a takeaway for you as well, is that when you're the music director of an organization or an orchestra or an opera company, it's very important to engage with the community. And in this jet age, well, maybe the jet age is done now in the last 2 years, but it had become such a thing that the jet age of conductors saw conductors not being resident in the cities where they were the music director or artistic director. You moved to Regina when you got the job. How important has that, what we took away from Bramwell played out in your role as music director? To be part of that community.
I think that is an essential step. And I think that, I don't have a crystal ball, but I see this country on the verge of a change in that respect. I think COVID has opened eyes in a lot of respects. And I think that if organizations are serious about engaging with their community, you can't do it unless there's buy-in from the top. It just doesn't happen. Otherwise, it becomes sort of a half measure, I believe. And so if you don't know about the community, if you don't understand the dynamics of who and where people are, I don't see how you can really be successful in this kind of work. So to me, it's super important. It's things like, one of the things early on, I remember with the advisory council, was that I was invited to go to a ceremony called a horse dance. And so I drove to this place just outside of Regina. Of course, this was well out of my comfort zone. It's not something that I've ever experienced, but of course I was honored. You know, it was an honor to be accepted. So I showed up, and of course I didn't know a soul, and everybody knows what's going on except me. But it was one of the most beautiful experiences, because I could see that one of the elders could see this white guy wandering around looking rather lost. And so he just said, "Hey, come over here, you sit by me." And he explained everything along the way. And it was really a transformative experience for me, not only to learn about this, to know that there's that much to learn, but to have someone say, "Hey, come sit beside me," it means a lot. And so you can't do that if you're not there. I mean, it's as simple as that.
You got to show up, right?
Yeah.
So curious, Gord, how this, what you've been learning about communicating and sharing ideas and asking for advice. I mean, I've spent a fair bit of time with one of the counselors here at West Bank First Nations, and I was speaking with him, I think it was shortly after your webinar, actually. I was speaking with him about just trying to meaningfully engage in dialogue, and he's shared lots with me, but I was looking for that next step. And he said something very smart to me. He said, if you are privileged to be invited to speak with a group of elders, don't book anything for the rest of the day. And bring food. And I love that, because you know, it's this idea where we live in this culture where everything has a clock and everything has to be done by a certain time, and then you're on to the next thing. And this idea where you're invited in to experience a way where you actually sit and learn and experience, as opposed to just kind of have a surface level opportunity. It changed my whole idea about the concept of time, which is something I struggle with anyway. But so it sounds like this experience of going to the Wild Horse Festival, Wild Horse, did I get it right?
It was a horse dance.
A horse dance.
Yeah.
And to have that opportunity, I think that's very special. Now, in this other way of learning then, and you know, being invited and building that relationship, and your Indigenous Advisory Council continuing with you beyond the first Forward Currents Festival, did it change the way you planned the next festival that was around mental health, so that you were building on the relationships you'd already created, as opposed to just going to a whole new set of relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, one of the things, sort of the commitment that we've made to the Indigenous Advisory Council is that every year with the Forward Currents Festival, no matter what the theme or the topic is, there will be an effort to provide a platform for Indigenous perspective on that particular issue, which I think is super important. And so, you know, when we did the mental health festival, we had Zoe Roy, who is educator and spoken word poet, who's Indigenous from Saskatchewan, from Saskatoon. And she came and she worked with kids at the high school where we held it. And they created these short films, which was super cool. So she was there and we showed all the films at the festival, which was cool. And then when we do the LGBTQ2S+ festival, Chris Dirksen and her partner are going to come, and we're still working on the details of what exactly it'll look like. But yeah, it's part of keeping that relationship alive and sort of feeding off ideas and letting it grow together, instead of having anyone feel like, okay, well, we did that part, now we're done, we're going to move on to something else.
Yeah, I know here in the Okanagan, you know, we've done some quite special projects that are quite outside of what we would traditionally have created. Like I'm thinking about the show that we did with Shane Coyson a few years ago, and that brought in a whole different audience. It was so exciting to see our traditional patrons sitting next to, you know, a 20-year-old covered in tattoos who was hearing the orchestra for the first time and was so exhilarated. I just had so much fun in the lobby. Remember the days when we could go out in the lobby and mingle with people? Yeah. And just hearing feedback about that experience, not only from these 20-year-olds who'd never heard the orchestra, but from someone who had been subscribing to the orchestra for 40 years.
Right.
But I remember, because that was a concert in the fall, and I thought, you know, in the planning of this, it took so much just to get that show put together, because it's not something that had been done before, either by our orchestra or by Shane. I had missed the opportunity to find another gateway into another show for this new audience. Oh, sorry, dog. So like hearing about how you're doing that, I'm gonna ask you a question quick so I can mute. Like to continue that relationship through these other festivals, I think is really amazing. Now, within the Forward Currents Festival, has that impacted, since you've initiated that, has it impacted the rest of the way you program your season as well?
That's a great question. You know, one of the things that is a bit of a, people sort of disagree on the approach. When you have something like a festival, you you run the risk of sort of siloing off a certain kind of repertoire or a certain kind of idea that you want to share or engage with your audience about. So, you know, I might do less of a particular thing because, oh, we're doing it during Forward Currents, which, you know, is a downside because I know that there's a large portion of my audience that doesn't come to Forward Currents. They want to come to, you know, the subscription classics or pops or whatever it is. So it's a little bit about trying to keep those threads going. One of the I think lucky and great stories for me was that the first Forward Currents Festival, I just happened to already be friends with someone who was about to be very famous, which was Jeremy Dutcher, who I'd known forever. And I knew that he was, for people that don't know, Jeremy is this amazing First Nations singer and songwriter and piano player from the East Coast. And just in a nutshell, he found these wax cylinder recordings of his ancestors singing their traditional songs. He digitized those and then created an album where basically he sings in a duet with his ancestors. It's an incredible thing. And his voice is the kind that will just make you cry. I mean, you can go find his album. It is amazing. He won the Polaris Prize shortly after it came out, and now he's very fancy. He's now friends and performed with Yo-Yo Ma and all this kind of stuff. But I knew him before this all happened, and I asked him, hey, do you want to come and do this project that I'm doing, which was the first Forward Currents Festival? So we arranged some charts for the orchestra to play along with his songs because his CD had just come out. Of course, that was an amazing hit. To this day, I've never experienced an audience reaction like this. His first song, which is probably only 3 or 4 minutes, and people leapt to their feet after the first song. It was remarkable. So anyway, then the challenge really came from the Indigenous Advisory Council saying, okay, this is great, we loved it. When are we going to see this kind of stuff in your regular subscription programming? Which, you know, there's more financial pressure to do that. I mean, there's more financial risk, I should say. And so what we did is that we decided then, not that following year, but the next year, we actually opened our Pops subscription series with him, which was, you know, for some people, they were uncomfortable about the risk of it because, you know, Pops is supposed to make lots and lots of money so that we can pay for, you know, the things that make less money. But it was a risk well worth taking because it was an amazing experience that I think many people won't forget.
Yeah, I had I went to see him in Calgary that, I think, same tour year. Yeah. And we made an immediate reach out to his agent to have him here, and we were looking at last season until, but yeah, so I very much hope for my listeners here today, if you haven't heard of Jeremy Dutcher, please check him out. It every time I hear his duets, it's heart-swelling music, and a gorgeous voice. And you coached him when he was like 15 or something, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I first met him, he was studying voice at Dalhousie University. So he was probably, like 17 or 18, long before any of us knew which paths our lives were going to take us.
Gordon, you've probably coached and conducted and played for literally hundreds, if not thousands, of young Canadian singers along your journey. How has that impacted your commitment to Canadian artists, and or like how do you build a relationship with a young singer that you give them an opportunity and then they owe you so you can continue to build that relationship? Is that something that you think about?
It is interesting. I do think, and this is something that I also would like to see some changes in our industry in this country, is that there are certain orchestras and I would say opera companies as well, whose job it is to find the beginners, to give them experiences, to help them get the tools they need to go on to quote unquote fancier places. And I feel very strongly that that's what my orchestra is. I think that's what most orchestras in Canada should be. Where I start to disagree with what I see happening is that some orchestras want to say, we're fancy like the Toronto Symphony, so we're going to bring in international this, international that. And I think that's a mistake, because we have an essential role in developing the ecology of artists in this country. And that starts when they're young. It's not about bringing in the stars to Regina. Now, once in a while, of course, sure. And if we can afford it, great. It would be great to have Renee Fleming in Regina, but I'd have to find a little bit more money for that. But I do think it's an essential step.
I totally agree. So we featured the 12-year-old Kevin Chen 4 years ago, and he just became at 16 years of age the youngest winner of the list competition ever.
Amazing. It's amazing.
It is amazing. And so he was on our stage. I can say to my patrons, you heard him win. He was only 12. I totally agree with you. Gordon and I really were kind of cut from the same cloth. We've had a lot of red wine together
That's true.
and shared a lot of philosophies. And I've learned so much from you. Gordon's the first person that taught me how to text. That went back a long way. We were working together on a production and we had to shift the rehearsal. And I said, oh, can you call Eric and let him know to come at a different time? And Gord looked at me and said, well, you'll probably get him faster if you text him. And I said, oh, right, okay. And I had my little flip phone. And I went, I don't know how to do that. So it's been a very fun source of amusement to have Gordon be my tech master on occasion. But I love engaging in dialogue with you. I think the approach that you bring to being a music director and an artist in this country, specifically in the context of Canada and the vastness of this country and all of the issues that we should be leading as artists, you truly are doing it. And I commend you so much. You inspire me daily. I love our Zooms, especially with a glass of wine in our hand. And I look forward to having you here in the Okanagan sometime when we can all get back to that as well. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, Gord. Do you have anything you want to add before we?
Well, no, I just want to say thank you, and I also want to say to all of the folks who are here that you're also very lucky to have Rosemary in your community, and I do feel like everything that Rose has said is mutual, and that we find the strength to go on and to find the next steps, not in a vacuum. But, we talk about these things and together we figure out where this crazy industry should go, and we do our little part to try and help it. And I feel like Rose and I are as she says, step and step on that one. So thank you.
It's nice to see your face there, Mr. Gerrard.
You too.
Our next Maestros Musings, everybody, is on November the 4th. It's Thursday from 12 to 12:45, and I will be speaking with Ivars Torrens, who comes to us from the Tafel Music organization in Toronto, where he founded the Tafel Music Chorus, played as a violist for many years, and he's become one of Canada's leading Baroque conductors. And so he will be performing with the orchestra in November. on an all Baroque show he called Bach's Library, because it's all scores that were found on Bach's Library. We've updated it and called it Bach's Playlist. But Baroque music is such a specialty, and it's not a specialty that I have. And so I can't wait to be sitting in the audience with you and watching Ivars bring that music to life. But for now, just my huge thanks to you, Gord. Congratulations on the opening of your season. Congratulations on your Forward Currents Festival. I think it's such a great example of how an orchestra can, bring our art form into this contemporary setting and really build audience and really build community. When is your festival currently scheduled now for this spring?
I think it's April 30th, or April 29, May 30th, or April 30th and May 1, I think.
So folks, most of the snow will be gone by then. If you're planning your
Come on
domestic
out to
travel,
Regina.
head out to Regina for this really
Absolutely.
innovative festival. Gordon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course.
And thank you to everybody for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.